Deebo Samuel has officially been traded at the Combine. It's a big weekend. It's a wild offseason, crazy start already to the offseason. I can barely speak because this is a really interesting football team right now. Transitional year potentially. Deebo Samuel now traded to the Washington Commanders for a 5th-round pick. Why did it happen? What does it mean for the 49ers, for the Commanders, and could Brandon Aiyuk be next? And what exactly is the plan for the San Francisco 49ers? All that and more coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Love our everydayers out there. Let us know you stop by. Hit the thumbs up on YouTube if you're hanging out with us live on this Sunday night as we get ready for another week of wacky NFL offseason that is not going to disappoint. And really, it hasn't been disappointing if you're a San Francisco 49ers fan. If you're new to the program, welcome. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. It's official, Croc. Deebo Samuel has been traded, going to the Washington Commanders for a 5th-round pick. Initially, what were your thoughts when you heard the trade was announced, and what are your thoughts for a Deebo-less San Francisco 49ers, and what do you think this means for the Washington Commanders? Like, if there's Commanders fans watching the show right now wondering, what are we getting right now in the projected 2025 version of Deebo Samuel?
Well, I'm pretty sure the Commander fan base and really the Commanders team, they're hoping that they get a motivated Deebo Samuel. And this is a guy clearly, has some issues. I did get word that, because a lot of people thought that it was the offseason where this, he requested the trade and all that. I've heard that he requested a trade prior to the trade deadline. So whatever his issues were with his team and the usage and all of that, like these are things that have been going on. I think he's a terrific football player. And I think he's locked in and he's in shape and all that. They're getting a really good guy that brings a different element to their offense. And with Jaden Daniels, his ability, some of the things that, he's good at, I think just being able to get the ball in the hands of someone who's a playmaker, I think will help that offense. So, if I was a Commander fan, I'd be excited to get Deebo as long as he's in shape. Because if he's in shape, he's a handful to deal with.
Do you think what is the reason of Deebo not looking quite as explosive last year? Save a couple of games here and there. He didn't quite look like the same Deebo Samuel. Do you think it was him being out of shape? Do you think maybe he's just aging out and that's the guy that you expect to see? I mean, the dude was hospitalized with pneumonia. That can't be something that's very easy for a big-time athlete to get over and be like amazing and the exactly same person immediately. And that happened, early on in the season. And he did look better a little bit at the end of the season. Could there be a better version of Deebo that's maybe not 2021 Deebo, but closer to that than what we saw with the 49ers in 2024?
No, I think for them, it's just like consistency and being able to use them in a consistent way. He did have like few big games last year. But then there's a 5-yard game and then a 20-yard game and a 20-yard game and a 20-yard game. And there are way too many of those. We weren't used to seeing that from Deebo Samuel. So why the big difference? Like, why is it that you can go off for 100 yards and 100 yards or 90 yards and then have these games where you only have 5 yards? And I think that may have been part of the reason why he was a little disgruntled. Again, in my opinion, I don't know if he was in the best shape. It said he was heading into training camp, and at training camp, we definitely saw a terrific version of Deebo Samuel, but maybe after the pneumonia stuff, maybe, as he started to get a little, disgruntled, some other issues popped up, and he was someone who, shout out to my guy Marco, he tweeted out, like, man, I could see, he tweeted this actually in December, and I should, let's bring up the exact tweet here, but in December, he said, nope, it's not that one. Let's see if I could. Okay, here we go. In December, he said, even if the 49ers don't decide to move off of Deebo this year, there's a strong possibility he requests a trade. He seems frustrated with his usage. His numbers are down. He may ask to be moved. Now, he said that in December 8th. So the season was still going on. And he was spot on with that whole situation. And I think for both sides, the 49ers, Deebo Samuel, it seems like it's a kind of a mutual parting ways between the two sides. So I don't know. It's interesting because he's a very unique football player. I think his career has been very unique, having a very high, was it 2021, I believe, where he went off for 1,400 receiving yards, had another few hundred rushing yards, had 14 touchdowns. And we haven't seen quite that version, but we have seen a guy who at any given moment had the ability to take over a game. We saw that in that Philly the revenge game. Where he just, 3 touchdowns, going crazy, running off on guys. So he's always had that kind of ability. The inconsistency, I'm not sure what that's about.
Yeah, and basically what Deebo Samuel is, again, for those Commanders fans that might be watching, and what to expect from him, is it going to be somebody where the 49ers are like, oh, regret giving up Deebo Samuel. He is such a unique player, and he's kind of a one-of-a-kind player in the league because of how he plays, and he's not going to tear up man coverage. He's good against zone coverage. And I think he fits in well, kind of like he did with Brandon Aiyuk in a 1-2 role. He fits in similarly well with Terry McLaurin in Washington, I think, who can be more of a man beater, can give you some stuff down the field. And Deebo can do a lot of work against zone. And you give him short stuff, let him run, move him around, use him in the backfield, and do all of those things and some run after the catch. Even the diminished version of Deebo Samuel is a very useful and very unique player and still potentially a dynamic kick return man. I think you got to use him as a kickoff returner at this point in his career too. And so, almost like he could be like a Cordero Patterson later in his career too, where he's just kind of a role player and might not be the force he was in 2021, but still a very useful player. And I think there's still a little bit left in him, and maybe, the little chip on his shoulder of going to a new spot and maybe have an opportunity to showcase even more in an offense that's probably going to throw the ball. There's going to be more volume of passes in Washington and balls to go around than there was in San Francisco. So who knows, maybe statistically he could be a lot better next year than he was last year. And really, I think looking back, like you would probably agree with me, right, Croc, that Deebo Samuel was one of, if not the most fun player to watch as just a pure fan of the game and watching 49ers game. And when he was on, he was the most fun guy to watch on the entire team.
It was the best weapon that they had, no matter how they had to use them. There are games. I saw someone tweet out, what was your favorite Deebo Samuel moment or game? And, obviously the Philadelphia game, just because of what it meant, the revenge game, everything he talked about, he backed it up. So I thought, that was just, you got to see every part of Deebo Samuel and what he was. But there are plenty of games where, he was able to take over or made these super impactful plays. I think it was the Week 18 game against the Rams. Just the plays that he made in that game, the timing of it, like just as a receiver. The Dallas Cowboy playoff game where, he took the end around, cut back, and just darted through the entire defense. Just so many special moments from Deebo Samuel. And, I wish him the best and hope that moving forward he can, be a little bit more consistent with all aspects of his game. And I hope this is a wake-up call. A lot of people are like, oh, I need more as a receiver. I need more of that. That was something that I definitely made a note of. I think in the 2021 season where, he was starting to embrace the wide back role maybe a little bit too much and maybe not developing or going as hard in other aspects as just a pure route runner. I think as his career went on, he kind of got a little bit further and further away from that. So if he can get back to that, get a little bit lighter so he's light on his feet, you're going to be teams are going to be dealing with a handful because he can beat you in a bunch of different ways.
He can take over game, much like Steph Curry, who's clearly by a long shot the greatest point guard of all time. Croc was arguing with some folks about Steph Curry this weekend, so that's why I threw that little jab in there. But no, Deebo Samuel is super fun to watch, and when he gets hot, it's like it's pretty fun. It is kind of similar to when a Curry flurry, right? When you this dude that you can't stop and comes at you in a little bit of a different way, but you have to find ways to get him the football too. And probably a pretty good fit, I think, in Washington with Jaden Daniels, take some pressure off the offense. They're probably going to still draft another young receiver to kind of pair with those older guys that are in their late 20s, and have the veteran 1-2 punch there at wide receiver. And Cliff Kingsbury, I think, we'll be able to utilize them. And I think it's a nice fit for the Washington.
And we're not expecting them to draft a receiver early, right? Because I saw a lot of people say, man, you see all this news kind of floating around, and maybe we should start looking a little bit more at T-Mac McMillan, the receiver at Arizona, or dive into more Burden film or some of the other receivers in this class. Third round seems like about right. I don't know if the 49ers are, after drafting Ricky Pearsall in the first round, at the tail end of the first round, you had that 5th-year option. Do they draft a receiver in the first round again? I will say this though, and I remember when they drafted Brandon Aiyuk, I always thought that was a little weird, because you got Deebo in the 2nd round. You got him in the 2nd round. You didn't have to spend the 1st-round pick on him, and he was terrific as a rookie. He was really good. And then the very next year, you draft Brandon Aiyuk in the 1st round. And I always thought, hey, there's going to come a point where, unless you think that one of these guys are going to suck, like, you're going to have to pay them both. And that's going to be a lot of money invested in the wide receiver position when the team isn't, like, the receivers aren't the focal point of the offense. And at some point, I knew it was going to get a little weird. And with this contract shakeup and trying to figure out money, and you drafted Pearsall, somebody had to go, and it ended up being Deebo, which a lot of us expected. Expected last year.
I agreed with you until this Brandon Aiyuk stuff has sort of popped up too. And if there's a plan to trade Brandon Aiyuk, even if it's not this offseason, but maybe sometime soon, next offseason, sometime, before or around halfway through his new contract, then maybe that does open up the idea of drafting a wide receiver high again. And so I want to talk about that and the reports about Brandon Aiyuk and his potential availability in trade on top of a Deebo Samuel trade, and what exactly is going on with the 49ers front office, because something isn't quite adding up right now, at least to me. We'll see if we can figure it out next. This episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. And the app is super easy to use, super fun. And when you win, you get paid instantly. And I know this is a 49ers podcast. This is a football podcast. Plenty of ways to bet on NFL football as well. You got the college tournament coming up now that the calendar has turned to March. NFL draft props, tons of ways to play right now at FanDuel. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Croc, we've talked a lot about John Lynch's comments when asked about teams reportedly calling about Brandon Aiyuk in a trade. And now there's been even further reports since then. Ian Rappaport and Mike Silver, both they would be, in fact, tickled to trade Brandon Aiyuk, apparently. And Ian Rappaport confirms that the 49ers are indeed open to trading Brandon Aiyuk. It's still hard for me to wrap my brain around that idea because of A, you got rid of Deebo Samuel. What is the wide receiver room like as you build this thing out? B, Brandon Aiyuk is not that young, and he is your best man-beating wide receiver. And I think the 49ers passing game has looked worse when he's not on the field than it does then even when someone like Deebo Samuel has been off.
It took a big hit.
Yeah.
When you look at up until he was out, in the lineup, and then when he got hurt, you look at kind of like some of the advanced metric stats, the offense took a big hit not having Brandon Aiyuk on the field.
And that's even with him not playing that great after missing camp and signing a deal right before the start of the season. And so then C, which is the biggest one of all of this, is you just signed him. If you not only if you are willing to trade Brandon Aiyuk, but you would actually kind of like to trade Brandon Aiyuk right now, then there's a big problem and you screwed that up. Like it was a miscalculation, a mismanagement of the roster. If you're trying to trade Brandon Aiyuk right now, there's no way getting around that. And teams make mistakes The best teams make mistakes. The Bill Belichick Patriots, we had a 20-year run. They screwed some things up every now and again. The Kansas City Chiefs have messed up some things every now and again. And so the Niners have screwed up before. I mean, it wouldn't be a worse screw up than spending 3 first-round picks on a quarterback who doesn't play for you. And so like that happens. So it's not the end of the world, but it is a clear it's a clear screw up, right? They mismanaged the Brandon Aiyuk situation. If they feel like they would like to trade him right now, why did you sign him? It makes no sense. Taking a 40 mil hit after the Deebo, 30 mil dead cat. Now, look, I got into broadcasting so I didn't have to do accounting. This kind of ticks me off how much I have to talk about salary cap and all these manipulations and all this bookkeeping that goes on. And John Lynch talked about it, Croc, when he was at the podium, the actual cash that the 49ers are spending, which is different than actually salary cap dollars. And sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less than what the actual accounting says. And the $30 million dead money with Deebo Samuel's trade, well, $17 million of it is going to be picked up by the Washington Commanders. They're going to pay him. It goes to the Niners cap, but the actual real dollars are being paid by the Washington Commanders. So along with the 5th round pick, that's the benefit of trading Deebo Samuel is you're getting $17 million that you don't have to actually pay in real cash dollars, not just cap fake dollars, not just the accounting. The real portion the 49ers don't have to pay of that $17 million now that Washington will pay him, and you get a 5th round pick back. And so the trade looks better than what Deebo for a pick. To a lot of people might seem like you got nothing back. So it's better than that. So I don't think you should have expected more than a 5th round pick in that case. But as far as the Aiyuk thing, this one doesn't make any sense at all. That's another 40 mil dead money. And you don't sign a guy to a long-term deal and then trade him 6 months later. You just don't do it. And what would a team even give up for him now that he's trying to come back from a torn ACL?
Do you think that this is more about maybe two people in the front office or multiple people in the front office maybe not being on the same page about Brandon Aiyuk? It seems like, because there's no other explanation for saying, all right, we're going to pay this guy, we're all in. And then the very next year, I get it, he got hurt. I mean, but he's not going to be the first guy to get a contract, get hurt. And then, you don't typically see teams say, you got hurt. Well, we got no use for you anymore. Like, get out of here. Or we're looking to field offers potentially. Like, we're even thinking about it. It's almost like, and I got a lot of pushback, not a lot of pushback. I got some pushback on this on social media because I was just like, what the heck is their plan? A lot of people are like, well, there's nothing wrong with seeing if teams were willing to get him. And the way I looked at it was like this. Peacock, you're married. I'm married as well, going on 10 years this year. And it would be like me marrying my wife, right? Like that's me committing to my wife. It's I'm married to my wife, but then saying, but maybe something better is out there. Like, let me just see. Let me just hear if there's some other women that's better for me. Like, no, you find that out in the dating process. You find that out. Okay, we're together. Let's see, whatever, right? If there's something potentially someone better, not once you commit. So the 49ers had a great opportunity last season. If there were any thoughts that maybe there's something about Aiyuk that we don't like, or we're not on the same page or whatever, you had a great opportunity to be able to trade him. And not when they were going to trade him. I'm talking about in March. You knew who he was, right? So before the league year, like that's when you were going to get the most for him, right? You had a great opportunity to say, you know what? We don't want to pay him all this money. We feel like maybe there's something about him we don't quite like or whatever. We might be willing to move off of him. Let's trade him now. That would be the highest value, trade him in March. Instead, you waited, and then you waited to where everybody already signed their free agents. Everyone already made their draft picks. Their rosters are pretty set. And then now, money's tied up. And then now it's like, oh, well, let's pay them now. So, or let's trade them now and see what's out there. You found out what's out there. There still were teams that are willing to trade a lot for him. You sign him, and then he tears his knee up. Like, what value does he have now? Like, it was the most value the year before. So if there were any thoughts of not wanting him moving forward, they just kind of butchered the situation. Now, he may very well stay because they don't get something that they like. But just the thought, you kind of put that out there that you're willing to move off of him after just committing to him. And then you wonder why Brandon Aiyuk acts weird towards you guys. Well, it's because you guys do things like this and say things like that in the media.
And so when you put John Lynch's comments together, when you put their actions, their words together, and then the report from Kyle Kami about how the front office might not be super excited. When I say front office, I'm not even talking about the GM, John Lynch, who's usually, considered front office, obviously. But I do feel like there's probably a Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch, super competitive. They want to spend every dollar possible to have the best possible team right now. And maybe there's times where, especially Kyle Shanahan's side of things, is not really thinking about the long-term ramifications, right? He runs upstairs at the last minute, the 11th hour, and kills the trade. And like Brandon Aiyuk could be a Pittsburgh Steeler right now. And like the deal was done. Mike Tomlin, and I guess I can talk more about the story. Do you remember when I was kind of reporting on it, that it was like, man, the people in Pittsburgh think it's done. Mike Tomlin thought Brandon Aiyuk was on his way to the Steelers. And he was at a bar in training camp, and there's people around, media around, and Arthur Smith walks into the bar, and he's dancing, having a good time. He's like, Arthur, guess what? We got a surprise for you tomorrow. You're going to be really happy about this one. And then the trade doesn't happen. It falls through. And like that deal was done, and Kyle Shanahan ran upstairs and killed the trade. And I think, whether it's, I don't know who the sources are, if it's Prague, if it's Jed himself, if maybe it's John Lynch, I don't know. But there's definitely a disconnect with the team, how the roster has been put together, who's signing the checks, how much has been paid, and they still haven't done the biggest deal they're going to have to do, which is Brock Purdy. And so clearly there's some kind of a disconnect right now with, and it's hard to know exactly, and we'll probably never know, or it'll be a while before we find out some details about some of this, but there's something disjointed about the 49ers front office, from Jed York to John Lynch to Kyle Shanahan, that is a little strange right now, because you don't sign someone to a long-term contract like Brandon Aiyuk at the top of the market and want to trade him 6 months later. Like, it doesn't happen. And it doesn't even make sense cap-wise. Like, it hurts you to trade Brandon Aiyuk right now. And people are talking about the ACL injury. Jordan in the chat says, why are we ignoring the severity of the injury? I don't know. I'm not a doctor either. Like, I'm not an accountant. I'm not a doctor. I don't like talking about all these injuries and all this cap stuff. I want to focus on the football, put on the tape, and let's watch these players. Right. And can't wait to get into the combine a little bit more this week.
Teams don't like, you don't see, this player tore his ACL, so now let's trade him. Like, yeah, no, that's still your player. He'll be back. Like, right. He'll be back. He's going to rehab and monitor the rehab. Is it going well? Then you have him the next year. Like, you don't say, well, he tore his ACL, so now we're going to trade him and eat $40 million in dead cap or whatever the hell it is. Like that. I don't know if that's ever happened where you sign a player the year before. We've seen plenty of guys get hurt. Right. I'd be like Nick Bosa. 49ers drafted Nick Bosa. He had a great year. Then the next year he gets hurt. He tears his ACL week 2 against the Jets. And it's like, well, it was fun while I lasted. Let's trade Nick Bosa now.
And Bosa came back from that and was defensive player of the year. Like, people come back from ACLs, right? And I know it's ACL plus, I think, MCL for Brandon Aiyuk, but the reports are that he's ahead of schedule. He's doing well. That might be John Lynch putting that out there to try to soften it for teams that might be looking for trades. We got to talk more about this. What's going on with the 49ers front office, the disconnect there, and what this offseason might look like, and see if we can figure out, like, what's the plan? Like, what even is the plan, Croc? Next. All right, so Brandon Aiyuk, according to multiple reports, is available, and the 49ers might even prefer to trade him at this point, which is mismanagement. They screwed something up there. And to lose potentially both, or want to lose both of your veteran 1 and 2 wide receivers in the same offseason is not how you build a football team. It's not how you get closer to a Super Bowl in the near term. Now, in the long term, could it be best for the team? And we've talked a lot about Brock Purdy, and the Brock Purdy conversation is a little frustrating for me, Croc, because it sounds like to some fans that you have to you have to crush Brock Purdy if you don't think he's the best quarterback in the NFL, right? If you're like, well, it would kind of be nice for the 49ers to pay Brock Purdy at a level that they could still build the rest of the team around him. And we talk about some of the faults in Purdy and why he's not Josh Allen and why he's not Lamar Jackson and why he's not Patrick Mahomes. So you shouldn't pay him like that. And some of the contracts that we've seen with quarterbacks that have been paid at a very high range would be contracts that I wouldn't want to do for those quarterbacks that they were done for. And I wouldn't want those same contracts for Brock Purdy, because it's such a different calculus to build a football team that's like just a star-studded cast, big time players, all of them hitting their prime or in their prime or at the end of their prime at the same time, like the 49ers had in 2023, and you have a $1 million quarterback. Like that's one way to build a football team. Well, if that same quarterback is now making 50 times, 60 times as much as you used to be making, and now you are jettisoning the star players in their prime, and they're either hanging around post prime or there's not on the football team at all, that's a very different build, and that's not getting closer to the Super Bowl, in my opinion. So, and John Lynch talked about how much cash they're spending, number 2 cash spending team in the NFL. I think second to only the Philadelphia Eagles in recent history. They have a lot of expensive football players. They do need to get younger and faster and cheaper and healthier, right? And so I think all those things make sense. But is trading Brandon Aiyuk the way to get there? What is the plan? Is I feel like they don't have much of a plan right now, and it's hard to figure out what that plan is and how this team does get closer to Lombardi number 6.
When John was asked about it, right, that was a great opportunity to just be like, oh man, Brandon Aiyuk is a 49er. He's going to be a 49er. And he's, there have been some teams that poked around asking about him, but, we're focused on him, his recovery, getting healthy and being the best he could be on the field. Like, I feel like that should have been. So once you open up those
first sentence, right? The first sentence was, oh, that's what happens when you have good players. Just stop talking. That was the end of it. You answered it. And anyway, go ahead, Carl.
I do see in the chat, though, people talking about it. And do you think that maybe the 49ers are in a full-on rebuild? And do you going into a rebuild that same year paying your quarterback top dollar at the quarterback position?
If you for sure pay your quarterback and then go that direction, if you think that, because look, if you want to have a long-lasting, winning franchise and football team, if you have the marriage of like the real deal head coach and the real deal quarterback, and Kyle Shanahan called Brock Purdy the real deal, you can win for a long time, and the rest of the roster can change. And we saw it in New England where every single all other 52 guys on the roster were swapped out, and they won Super Bowls with both groups, right? And so if Brock Purdy is that, you pay him, you don't look back, you got Kyle Shanahan, and you put together a different group that ends up going to a Super Bowl later, right? And my question is that marriage of coach and quarterback, is it on that level where, no, we're good, we got that foundation and we're going to change the other pieces, and then you build it long term? Then I would agree to that. But I'm not sure if I'm ready to say that Kyle Shanahan, Brock Purdy is that level of marriage. And certainly it's not a, Brady Belichick. It's not an Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes. But they should be a good enough football team to win. But again, it's going to look very different, the team you build around expensive Brock Purdy, than the team you built around cheap Brock Purdy. And how much better can Brock Purdy get from here? Because, age-wise, he's not entering his prime years, but have we already seen prime Brock Purdy?
We kind of had a taste of that last season, right? You talk about kind of losing pieces and things, right? Like you think the Kansas City Chiefs and some of these teams where they kind of, even Buffalo Bills. And this is why we say, we're not comparing Brock to these guys, but when you look at what they're capable of doing, even through transition, like the Chiefs have been through a lot of transition as far as their receivers, and they have weapons, and they, get hurt, and they lost a lot, and the running back gets hurt and all these things. And it's like, oh, well, you're still going to go 15-2. Right. And the 49ers, when you have some injuries and this happened and this happened, it's like, man, won 6 games. Like, now Brock, very early and young in his career, I think you can talk about why each game turned out the way it did, but ultimately the results are the results. You won 6 football games. So I wouldn't quite put Purdy and Shanahan on that tier that can withstand this type of restructuring of the roster and all that, and still think they're going to rattle off a bunch of wins in the season. Team is getting older. Ian Sharp says it in the chat. He says it's an aging team.
It is. It's the oldest roster. Yeah, oldest roster on average in the NFL. Their rookie class is kind of old. That was the thing about the weird response from John Lynch about Brandon Aiyuk when he started talking about that the team needs to get younger. It's like Brandon Aiyuk is one of their younger star players. And that's why, and like we've talked about it on this show, the moment they drafted Ricky Pearsall, and it was like, okay, well, they're going to pay Brandon Aiyuk and they're going to trade away Deebo Samuel. Like trading Deebo Samuel this offseason should be no surprise. It was actually it's the plan that made the most sense. The Aiyuk stuff makes a lot less sense. And the restructuring of Deebo's contract to where you had all this dead money in this offseason where it was made the most sense to get out of the Deebo Samuel experience and to potentially trade him. The fact that they did the restructure, that was some mismanagement as well from a cap perspective. Are they going to be fine with the cap? I think so. They obviously had enough cap space to absorb that hit, and it's not going to be a big problem for them. And then it's not going to be on the books at all next year because there's not going to be any June 1st shenanigans where it's spread across 2 years. So they're going to take their medicine there on the Deebo thing, and then he'll be completely off the books for 2026. But the big question here with the team is like, okay, get younger, and hopefully that means you're faster and healthier and all those things. But man, you got to hit on a lot of players and replace a lot of star players in the future to be just even as good as you were before, unless Brock Purdy is still ascending into an area where having him and Kyle Shanahan together is like, that's all you need as the foundation. And then you build everything else around that. And I think there's some truth to that with Kyle Shanahan. I think there's some players that, like, would George Kittle have been as good as in his career if he got drafted by a different team? Would Deebo Samuel have been as good if he was drafted by a different team? Would Brock Purdy have been as good if he was drafted by a different team? Would Jimmy Garoppolo have been as good if he was traded to a different team? I think there's plenty of evidence to say that all those players would have been probably not quite as good if they weren't able to go. So despite some fans not liking some of the management style of Kyle Shanahan, one thing is clear is he can scheme things up for his players. And I think he can get guys talent to play up in a lot of ways, but we haven't really found any of that out because they've just been hoarding their own guys. And at some point you do have to start letting people go, like the great Bill Walsh did. And there does need to be some roster turnover, but it feels like they started that process a little late. And instead of gradually mixing the two together and letting some guys go and then maybe trading some guys a year too early rather than a year too late and melding that together, now it's all of a sudden this like, oh, we have to do it now. And there's this big Brock Purdy expenditure and we got to cut salary and we got to get younger, and doing it abruptly is going to make your team a lot worse in the short term. And then can you get back, or can you not drop off quickly? And can you get back quickly if you do drop off is the big question for me from a total roster standpoint. Or is Brock Purdy that good and the 49ers are just going to be fine with whoever's out there?
Well, I think that's their hope. And, Brock Purdy's still very young, and he's done a terrific job for the most part, to this, again, last year I put some on his, not the way, not six, how can I explain this? What I put on him is like, then you couldn't get 8-9 wins, right? Like, because things are going to happen. There's going to be missed field goals and fumbles and all these things. Can you figure out where it's like, we weren't just all the way terrible, instead of kind of reminiscing of the 2020 season or the 2017 season? Like, can you figure that out? That's what I would like to see. And I hope that moving forward, because these things are going to happen. Like you're not always going to be healthy. You're not always going to have a loaded roster. And within that, can you figure it out? I mean, the Rams with Matthew Stafford. Now, again, I don't want to compare, Brock and Matthew Stafford, all that, but just in the sense of what he did. The defense stepped up. They did a terrific job. I mean, he was without Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, and Cooper Kupp's kind of washed now, and he played without those guys for a lot of the season. I mean, most people can't really name their running backs like that. I do like Kyron Williams, but it wasn't a loaded roster. And even then, he said, we just got to figure out how to squeak out some wins. And it came down to, tight games, making big throws in tight games. And all of a sudden, that's how you can win more. And you saw the Rams make it to a postseason game. And shoot, I mean, they really kind of had the Eagles on the ropes a little bit. Like, it was a good game. So, I just would like to see that's the next thing for the 49ers. Like, whatever the roster looks like, are you still going to be a competitive team, through just the ebbs and flows of what a football season typically is, which is that's a lot of things that just happen out of your control.
And that's probably the way the lens to look through this whole situation. And we're talking about the front office and stuff. It's like, imagine if you were Jed York and you were the second highest cash paying team, the highest cash paying team just won the Super Bowl, and you won 6 games and you're writing these checks, right? You would probably be pretty unhappy about that and the return on that. And the fact that the Niners won 6 games and they're drafting around teams like the Bears and the Saints and the Raiders, right? That's how bad the 49ers were. And I know there was a lot of injuries, but the 49ers still had Trent Williams for part of the season. They still had Deebo all year. They had George Kittle all year. They had the fourth 14th graded offensive line. I don't think their
Juwan
offensive line.
Jennings stepped up.
Juwan Jennings played really well for them. They still had Fred Warner all year. They still had Nick Bosa all year. They still had some good players in their secondary. Some good young players stepped up as well. Like there was a lot of talent on that football team that some of those teams I just talked about would kill for that level of talent. And I keep saying this, that was the broken down version, like the worst version of the 49ers. Still had a lot of talent on the football team. Like that should be a better than 6-win team. And that if you're Jed York and you're looking at Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch in a meeting, you're like, guys, I'm paying the second most cash in the entire NFL for this roster, and we won 6 games. That is not good enough, and I can pay a lot less money to win 6 games.
Right.
Combine is near. Are they all done? Did they finish working out on Sunday? I don't even know. The offensive linemen are on the field. Got some big takeaways from the entire weekend at the Combine. We've got more prospects to look at as we break down our 2025 official Locked On 49ers big board as co-GMs Peacock as we see them. More players to break down, Combine performances, and it's nearly the start of the new league year, which means free agency as well coming up in about 10 days. All that covered for you every single day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. And Croc and I back tomorrow right here, Locked On 49ers.